Okay. Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Arion, and he's in South Africa, and he's going to tell us about his, he has an autobiography and has a very profound spiritual experience included in that. And we welcome him to share whatever he likes. Hi, Arion.
Hi, Peggy. Peggy, first of all, I just really want to say sincerely thank you for somebody in the USA being willing to speak to somebody in the deep south of Johannesburg, South Africa. And it's quite incredible how your show is having global reach. And so I really honor you and thank you for the work that you do on your show and for allowing me to share my story.
Welcome. So feel free to jump right in.
Okay, perfect. So, excuse me, I'm an author of a book called Bedroom Called Rainbow. It's an autobiography about my life. And it's a very complex story. There's lots of stuff in it. We can get into it if you choose later. But I was born with a prophetic gifting. So I've always had a spiritual sensitivity. The first prophetic vision that I saw, I was 3-4 years old, and I saw my dad's youngest brother drowning in the ocean, and 2 weeks later he drowned in the ocean. And there were many random events like that in my life. So spirituality and I are deeply connected. And in my book, in the one chapter, it's called The Blue Skies That Speak. And it's this encounter where I was on this hell-bent scenario to try and kill myself. I was desperately unhappy and taking narcotics, and it had gone on for about 2 weeks, but somehow even something quite big. And I remember it was a Saturday night, and I had booked into this hotel, and I had this app on my phone called Mixcloud, which is a music app, and I had run out of search words to find music to try and make myself happy. Happy house, anything. And so by default, or accident, I should rather say, I typed in joyful house, and this one DJ mix came up, and I went into the bathroom and I was consuming narcotics. And all of a sudden, there was this visual of this form that looked like a human. It was a flame, it was a light. And initially, I thought, okay, maybe I'm hallucinating. And what was fascinating is that the minute I recognized that there was this spiritual form, the form, I'm going to call it God. It could be an angel, it could be any form of spirituality. I believe that it was God sent. So for the sake of ease of understanding, we'll call it God. And this form drew my attention to the lyrics of this particular DJ mix that was playing, and then started talking to me. And I know it sounds pretty strange, but what was fascinating is that I'm not generally a person that listens to the lyrics in music, unless it's Christian music, but I'm normally a dancer, so it's about the bass, all about the bass. And so this entity, this God, started highlighting various lyrics in different tracks, and there was about 5 or 6 different tracks. And what was fascinating for me is that every single track had a sentence, an exact sentence of an exact thought that I had been running through my mind in this 2-week binge, trying to find a way to kill myself. And it just, each one built into the next one. Eventually got to the point where this angel, this God, said to me, you know, Arion, you've been called. Are you going to take the call? And I know that I've been called, and for people who don't know what that means, in terms of the Christian context, it means, you know, you've been called by God to serve God in a particular area. And said to me, are you going to take this call? And I said, yes. And at that moment, I started to fall, and I could see the corner of the shower coming towards me. And somehow this form, this energy, pushed me that I landed in the bath. And at the time, there was this lyric in the song which said, "Catch a falling dream." And I just remember weeping because I was a few months away from a major South African hairdressing competition that I desperately wanted to enter. I'd entered numerous times and didn't win. And at the end of this track, of this mix that I had typed into a Mixcloud, it was called Joyful House. My absolute favorite song of all time played, and it was Michael Jackson, Billie Jean. And I love dancing, and I used to love dancing to Michael Jackson. So I pulled myself out of this bath and trying to dance, and this energy, this God, this form said to me, "Arion, you've got one of two choices ahead of you now. You're either going to flush the rest of your drugs down the toilet and then we take it from there, or you're going to continue consuming them and face the consequences." And being me, being somebody that was struggling with addiction back then, I continued to take the drugs. And it was fascinating because from the second that that question was posed to me, I could literally feel my body starting to shut down and die. But to the point that I started getting very scared, and I couldn't type any messages on my phone because it just looked like letters, like ants running off the screen. And all I could do was take a picture and hit send and hope that it was somebody that would pick it up. And eventually passed out in my bed. And all I remember the next morning was this person screaming at me and pulling me off my bed as I was drowning in my vomit. And as things started to sort of become clearer, it was my partner at that time who then said to me that had they not arrived exactly at the time that they would have arrived, I would have drowned in my own vomit. And what was amazing is that I then went and spoke to a friend of mine who's a pastor. He runs a church in the UK now, and told him about this incredible experience where I visually saw this entity, this song, and I played the mix for him and told him exactly what the lyrics were that were speaking to me and how they were an exact thought and all of this stuff. And I said to him, the part that devastated me was this line in this one track, "Catch a Falling Dream." And I said to him, my dream is to win this particular hairdressing competition. It's highly prestigious in South Africa. And he said to me, well, if that's what you believe that you have to do, because you've wasted all your money that was meant to go for this competition, you're going to have to depend on God. And obviously at that time, because there was narcotics involved, one kind of is unsure, was it a hallucination? Was it drug induced? Was it an actual event that actually happened? And about 2 months later was the finale of this particular competition, and I won. And what was amazing about it is that to do the live event, one morning God woke me up, and it was like when you plug a flash drive into a computer, and suddenly there was just this download of images, costumes, hairstyles, all these things, and that I used and then went and won this particular competition. And that cemented for me that this event where I actually physically saw this entity was actually in fact true. What has transpired since then is that I then became winning that competition and realizing that God literally had intervened in my life in a moment where I desperately wanted to be dead, and gave me the courage to then become self-employed and to take the plunge to see if I could do it on my own, not always be an employee of somebody. I then also started getting into politics in our country. Our country is amongst the most corrupt in the world, and our former president was really bad. And I realized that if I was going to fight for myself and for the hope of my little business becoming a success, it meant that I couldn't be indifferent to the political landscape in my country, coming out of apartheid and then corruption and this really mafia-style government in our country. And eventually got elected to be part of a political party. got vetoed to run for government. Unfortunately, our party didn't make it. But what then transpired is that God brought the opportunity for me to study my Bachelor of Theology degree, which I've done, and it was for free. I eventually got clean and sober completely. I eventually got to a point of choosing to be celibate for God and be pouring my heart, my life out for God and following Him. And my book, I knew about 15 years ago thereabout that I needed to write a book about my life story, but I was always a little bit insecure about who wants to read the life story of a struggling addict, somebody who was sexually abused, whatever. Like, who's interested if there's no positive thing to come out of that? And so that spiritual encounter that happened in about 2016, that spiritual encounter literally began changing the entire direction of my life.
Awesome. Now, you had a rough upbringing, correct?
Correct. I grew up in apartheid South Africa. So obviously, being white in South Africa at that time, there was advantages and privilege that was granted to white South Africans that was denied many other people in South Africa. But having said that, I grew up with a father who was a violent alcoholic. He literally tried to murder me twice, literally. And many times in a drunken rage would strangle me until I passed out so that I couldn't breathe. My dad was the kind of guy who would do things like grab my sister and I, there were two of us at the time, and lock us in the bedroom and force us to watch him cutting my mother's legs open and body open with a knife, stuff like that. He was really sociopathic. And then growing up in apartheid South Africa, where there was this very toxic version of masculinity, creative boys were frowned upon and you were called names and bracketed and stereotyped. This sense of unworthiness and being emasculated, not being worthwhile, and on top of then having this spiritual gifting, which makes everybody kind of feel that you're a bit of a weirdo. Because you can see it in their eyes and you can see it in the way that they speak to you. And to a child who doesn't comprehend why they can sometimes see things that other people can't see, that then all became interpreted through the filter of my Christianity, that obviously God hates me, that I'm suffering all of these things, therefore I must be the Antichrist, and really believe that God absolutely hated me and had set me up to punish me for being a terrible human being. And that translated into many dysfunctional behaviors later in life.
So how did you go from that to, where you were, the day of your spiritual experience?
So without sort of being condemning to any particular people group, however, being honest to my life story, I then obviously was trying to find places where you fit in and you belong and you're accepted. And so I started exploring the LGBT community. Because I had been sexually abused from the age of 4 to 13 and raped at the age of 12, a lot of my identity and my sexual attraction was distorted by being sexualized before I knew how to interpret sex. And so that translated into me finding identity within the LGBT community, expecting to find love is love and this belonging and this place where you feel safe. But instead it was the complete opposite. It was really just this sex fit, this nastiness, judgmental, that then introduced me into drug addiction. And the hook in terms of drug addiction is I love dancing. I wanted to be a ballet dancer, but my dad beat that out of me because boys don't dance. And so I have a natural rhythm and people always love the way I dance. And so when the drugs were introduced, I suddenly realized that I could dance for days upon days upon days and never get tired. And before I knew it, that hook then grew into full-blown addiction. And I had tried committing suicide once or twice. And at the age of 25, I got to a point where this question just wouldn't leave me. And the question was, that it's not normal for somebody to want to keep committing suicide. Why do I want to do that? I then decided to start going for therapy, secular therapy. I did some philosophical therapies, inner child workshops, all sorts of different therapies to try and understand why is it that I hate myself so much that all I want to do is die. And that eventually got me to the point of accepting that I have an addiction problem and getting into rehab. And in rehab, there's an organization in South Africa called the Christian Motorcycle Association, and they did a outreach to the rehab, and they handed out this little flyer, and on the flyer was the story of this biker who kept looking in his rearview mirror, driving off the cliff and killing himself. And that spoke to me because at the time I was also dealing drugs to support my habit, and kept looking in my rearview mirrors for the police and stuff like that, obviously. So I sheepishly went up to them and asked them if God would accept. Sure. I get quite emotional every time I tell the story. Is if God would accept a drug addict homosexual like myself. And they said to me that God accepts everybody and loves everybody, and that when we allow him into our lives, he will take us on the healing journey. Now, the fascinating thing is that as soon as I had prayed the salvation prayer, and that night or within the first day or two was one of my first aha moments and spiritual encounters. I remember waking up one night and I realized that I was sitting having a conversation with something that was in the room, but there was nothing in the room. But I knew it was God. And it was so bizarre to me because I didn't wake up and sit up. I literally woke up sitting up. And so this conversation had been going on for a period of time. And I remember, I'm going to again say God, because that's how I believe it. God told me to read Romans 1. And what is fascinating is that I hadn't touched the Bible since I was, 12, 13 years old. Didn't own a Bible. I was anti-God, anti-everything at that point in my life. And so I had to go and borrow a Bible, went to the nursing station of rehab, borrowed the Bible. It was completely torn apart. The covers were gone. Half the books were missing. But lo and behold, it had Romans 1. And so I read Romans 1, and if anyone hasn't read Romans 1, it's a hectic scripture that's a mirror about dysfunctional human behavior. And Romans 1 ends on verse 32, which says this, is that people, worst of all, that people who behave in these dysfunctional ways coerce others to do the same. And I realized that I was guilty of the sin of coercion. It was like God played a movie reel of my life. And I saw every time that I had coerced people at the bar to have another shooter, or sent the nudie pics, and tried to seduce people, or gave them drugs, trying to get my way. And I realized that I was guilty of the sin of coercion. And that was the first moment that I realized that the lifestyle that I had been living wasn't the lifestyle that God intended for me to live. And that was 18 years ago, and have walked a very difficult Christian walk because I'm stubborn by nature, and I'm also deeply academically analytical. So I don't easily take things at face value. I really have to search for the question and the meanings and the understanding and all of that before I just embrace anything. So I'm difficult to be in a relationship with because I need to know the if, the but, the why, the how, the everything. So, yes.
So, what do you do? What's your life like now?
Well, I through a process of sexual healing therapy. It's probably one of the most incredible therapies I've ever done, where I went with the therapist and we went and had a look at all the childhood sexual abuse, the parental violence, all of that, and the narrative that this young innocent Arion built as a self-defense, to become invisible, to just do what everybody else says and that nobody hurts you, all of that, and how that translated into sexual identity, the way I was having sex, the people I was attracted to, all of this kind of stuff. For example, I was always dating people that were slightly older, and the root of that was that I was looking for a father figure to protect me because I never had one. And so my little brain as a child thought that if I give older people what they want, they're going to give me what I want, which is protection. Well, it didn't really work that way. And the sexual healing therapy got me on a journey of really questioning my sexual identity, why I'm same-sex attracted, does it serve me, why does it hurt me, why don't I feel like I fit in. And over the 18 years, God has really beat every single argument that I've presented with to him. And I have laid every single theory and every argument before God. And he's gotten me to a point of being clean for 5.5 years, 6 years in February on the 18th, and 4 years celibate, giving up sex, giving up relationships for him, because a lot of my sexual preference and sexual identity was based in childhood trauma and not out of genuine authenticity. And that's where I'm at. I've become an ordained pastor, and I've got my Bachelor of Theology degree from Nation to Nation University in the USA. I did it online during the whole COVID period, and I continue my studies at a Ministers Academy in South Africa called Curious Ministers Academy, who have ordained me as a pastor, written my autobiography, busy writing my second book, which is going to be a self-evaluation manual for identity dysphoric people to be able to work through for themselves to see how much of their identity is steeped in trauma. Fun fact, somebody who loves facts and stats and stuff, is in the Gay and Lesbian Journal of Studies Journal, Gay and Lesbian Studies Journal, the stats show that an approximate up to 93% of all LGBT people were sexually abused in early childhood. And there's an incredible phenomenon which is called imprinted arousal pattern. And what happens is that the person who has been sexualized early forms the arousal imprints that they then reenact in their adulthood. And this is what spurred me on to write this self-evaluation manual. The other reason is that the Christian church is definitely growing in the understanding of identity dysphoric people, but there's still some prejudice, let's be honest. And so I'm hoping that this manual will be able to teach other people who don't really understand the dynamics of that community, how to counsel them, how to love them, how to bring them into healing restoration. And what's fascinating is that my book, Bedroom Called Rainbow, if I can show you Bedroom Called Rainbow, it's opened up an international community of people like myself who've lived that lifestyle, who've chosen to give it a full faith. And I'm including their testimonies and their stories throughout the book. So although I'm the sort of author putting it together, it's actually a co-authoring of people throughout the world, from Australia, the UK, all over the world, and their stories are being included in this evaluation manual. I'm hoping that it will reach out to the world and help others.
I had suggested that what you said is the 93%
Yes,
have been sexually abused. I didn't know statistics. I hadn't done any studies, but just my limited knowledge.
yes,
I had suggested that before, and people really got upset with me.
yes,
And it was just based on my limited view of I have a cousin that is a gay priest in California. And I know that my sons, because he had told me, my cousin had told me, not my sons, I'm sorry, didn't say that my brothers had sexually abused my cousin when he was a child. And he said, I'm not saying they caused it, but, he let me know his feelings about it. And then other limited knowledge I have of gay people, I was noticing a trend. It seemed like a lot of them were sexually abused as children.
yes,
Even Ellen, I heard her say on her show before that she had been raped as a young age and she never wanted one of those things near her again.
yes.
And so it's easy to understand from that perspective, from that hurt, but yet it seems like that community doesn't want us to talk about that. They don't.
Absolutely.
Do you
Absolutely.
understand why?
Yes. Well, so the take is this: is that if you have been hurt and you aren't willing to face your trauma, whether it be LGBT or any kind of trauma, what happens is that your neuro pathway, in order for you to feel okay about yourself, you develop these perspectives and narratives that because you keep rehearsing them, so there's another phenomenon called truth by repetition. You keep repeating these narratives that eventually you start to believe that the narrative is the truth because it's familiar. And so suddenly, when these people who are hurting are confronted by a truth that is counter to the narrative that they think is true, immediately the defenses go up, you know. And so, for your interest, if you're interested, if you research imprinted arousal patterns, and you try and find the gay and lesbian studies journal, there is so much information there about the level of sexual abuse, how LGBT recreate trauma on themselves. For example, one of the global stats within the LGBT community is that the global stat for heterosexual rape, men onto women, is 35% globally, but in the LGBT community, it's 45 to 50%. Lesbians raping each other or gay men raping each other. So the level of sexual dysfunction is so out of control. And so this is hence why I'm writing this self-evaluation manual and including the stories of actual other LGBTQ people and their testimonies and stuff like that. And I'm hoping that if it's a person who's lived that lifestyle rather than some academic psychologist, whatever, although there's a ton of psychology in it, they might perceive it better. But in 2019, a 15-year genetic study was released by an organization called 23andMe. So they did a 15-year genetic study testing the DNA of gay people, lesbian people, hetero people, all sorts of people. And the conclusion of that 15-year genetic study is that there is no gay gene, which means no person is actually born LGBTQ. However, the fascinating part is that there are 4 epimarkers that attach themselves to the DNA chain that could influence, and the language is very critical because the LGBT loves to say, oh, because of these 4 epimarkers, see, you are born there. The language doesn't say that at all. It says could possibly, number one, and the 4 epimarkers also translate to other symptoms. The one relates to balding, the one relates to smell, the other one relates to bipolar manic depressive disorder, and the other one relates to hypersexual predatorial disorder. Both of the last 2 are highly prevalent within the LGBT community. However, that study showed that the epimarkers are too small to be conclusive evidence of genetic LGBT identity, and concluded that LGBT identity dysphoria is learned socialized behavior. And so when we couple that genetic study to the Journal of Gay and Lesbian Studies, and we see this prevalence of 93%, up to 93% of people being sexually abused, and this phenomenon called imprinted arousal pattern, and we put them together, we realize that there are a lot of people running around believing a truth about themselves that actually isn't true at all.
It's a lie.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Believing a lie.
Yeah. And so that's why I'm writing the manual, so that people can read it. There's questions that they can ask themselves. It's a tool that pastors or parents or politicians or schools can use to be able to help people have an alternative. But one of the things that I really find so sad in our world is this tolerating the intolerable and forcing LGBT identity onto young, innocent children. And so basically it's just this cycle of abuse, of sexualizing children. And what's fascinating is that these people that are doing it are part of the 93% who were originally sexually abused. And so we just see this playing out of hurting people over and over and over again. And it's one of the reasons why I wrote my autobiography, because obviously when a gay person turns to God and then has all these amazing spiritual encounters, obviously it makes you controversial. And what I've done in my book is that it's not a polite Christian book. I wrote the story exactly as things have happened. There's some bad language. I've obviously used asterisks and stuff to try and be respectful, but I've been so incredibly honest in the book about what happens behind closed doors in the actual LGBT community, the level of abuse that happens on there, and on and on and on, and how this amazing God, this amazing Father has intervened in various spiritual encounters and therapy to get me to a point of learning to love myself and love Him and love others.
Isn't that an amazing thing to write a book? Because the first half of my book is about being abused as a child and sexual abuse and all those things, but yet the spiritual experiences is what, the focus is, that like you can have a really hard life and show the meaning of what these spiritual experiences do for a person that has lived a life like that. It's such saving grace.
Yes. No, well, that's the point, and for me, like I said, it's because I was born with this spiritual gifting, this prophetic gifting. The fascinating thing is even in therapy, in rehab, different therapies, one of the things that counselors struggled with was they couldn't come at me with philosophical ideology. Everything that they had to do had to revolve around spiritual. Because it's inbred in me, it's a part of me. I don't understand non-spiritual because I've never experienced non-spiritual. My whole life has been spiritual. They had to then look at my perceptions of spirituality to bring the healing. And so I hope that my book and your show will show people that spiritual things are not scary. Hollywood loves to amp it up and make it something very terrifying. But spiritual things are not scary. And if we allow ourselves the privilege of allowing God's Spirit and Him to direct us into healthy spirituality, there is such room for dynamic growth and healing that often secular type of therapy cannot do.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, and I know you didn't have a lot of time today, but I appreciate your courage and congratulations on the progress you've made in your life.
Yes. Thank you very much. And Pegi, I just want to extend blessings to you and your family and on your show, and truly sincerely commend you on your bravery to do a show like this and drawing people's attention to spiritual things, because we know that so many people kind of just live with blinkers on. And so I truly commend you as somebody who was born with it. I commend you and I give you honor for the work that you do. I
get bullied every time I have someone like this on. I will get hate mail. I will get threats.
Direct it straight to me. I've got all the answers. Well, not all the answers. I've got a lot of answers. And so I'm used to the bullying myself. It happened while I was still living the LGBT community, so I'm not afraid. And fortunately, because I'm a reader, I've got quite a lot of academic stuff that I can share with people, not as a weapon, but hopefully to prick their consciousness that possibly they might need to think about one or two things.
Okay. All right. Well, feel free to answer any comments. It's on the video.
I shall do that.
Okay.
And have a wonderful rest of your day from South Africa.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.